You put it like this.
Yeah. But the man who I knew as a father for a short while, he was 58 when I was born, and the complexity of his mind, the opposing, contradicting traits that we saw in him. So I, as a student of psychology, wanted to get into that mind and be able to understand what was it that made him who he was. And the third thing was that it was my own catharsis. I always consider myself to be, and quite proudly, a product of oddity. Being the, I think, 11th child of this very flamboyant man, totally contradictory in himself, it was quite a challenge for me to foray into an area of his mind which I knew very little of, and to be able to chronicle that into a book where I have attempted to, well, again, that was a challenge, to divorce myself as the daughter from the biographer. And I think I got a lot of flack for that because, firstly, being a woman, you don't write about parents. Secondly, demonizing him. I don't think I've demonized him, but I haven't written a hagiography. And the third thing is that writing in such great detail and candor about his life, of which I was a small part of.
The fact that your father was married 6 times is the first thing. You were very young when your father passed away. The fact that there were these 6 wives, young people sort of tend to look at things like this in a moralistic tone. Did that bother you?
No, never. We had a great tolerance to infidelity. I was brought up to believe that it's okay to have many extramaritals or maritals. The law changed in, I think it was 49. My mother was married in 46, and she was his last wife. In fact, that was her condition when she married him, that you're not going to ever marry again.
You've told a story, a very sweet story about how your parents met and how, in a sort of grandiose manner, your father courted her till she said yes. Would you like to tell the audience?
It was quite a fascinating tale. My mother was a poet. Her first poetry was published when she was 13 years old. And my father's 4th wife had instituted a prize for Indian literature. And her poem was entered for that. And she went to receive that prize. She came to Delhi. No, I think it was Lucknow, where she went to receive that prize. And my father saw her and fell in love with her. And then it was a hot chase for 2 years. He pursued her with all his might, and it must have been quite a high for my mother, who was, well, she definitely didn't understand that grandiose riches and flamboyance. And he pursued her for 2 years till she finally agreed to marry him. And the paradox was that it was during those 2 years that she also engaged in a correspondence with Nehru. And those days, women were very spirited and they were into the independence movement. And she was one of them who always, she in her own way broke all the rules. And she said, I don't want to get married. And she was the first woman graduate of Rajasthan. And although she came from a very conservative background, I think she broke the rules and she began this correspondence with Nehru, of which we have documented records, which he very sweetly always replied to her letters. And he told her that we need women like you to come and join the movement. So it came to a point after 2 years of my father's pursuit of her where she had to make the choice. It was either join Maulana Azad and the women's cell in the Congress or marry R.K. Dalmia. And the rest is history.
You brought in the character of Jawaharlal Nehru and the close association independently that both parents had with him. Now, in the case of your father, this association turned sour at some point of time.
Yes.
Would you like to throw some light on this? Because that's actually really how the politics and your family really gets integrated.
It was quite a tragic development. My father was a staunch supporter of the Congress. He was very close to Gandhi, funded the Congress from Bihar. That is where, in fact, he even stood for elections at one point. And he was also a very close friend of Jinnah. So my father always wanted Jinnah to be Prime Minister. And he had in his mind that one day Jinnah will be Prime Minister and he will be Finance Minister in his cabinet. Anyway, so it kind of soured with Nehru because my father blamed Nehru for the partition. And because he had just taken over Times of India at the eve of partition, So when the refugees came milling into Punjab and into Bengal, my father ran this vilification campaign on the front pages of Times of India, where he blamed Nehru for the plight of the refugees. And he went from every refugee camp distributing largesse, and he became the big messiah of the undertrodden, and it was his one-point mission to demolish Nehru. So I don't blame Nehru for the hostility that grew, and it became Nehru's one-point mission to destroy my father, which he was able to do, because you don't take on the might of the Prime Minister.
Now, the book that you wrote is named after your father, but obviously woven into it is the story of your mother as well. So my question is, in this rather dramatic setting of the book and the life, were you actually able to be fair to both of them, mother and father?
I think I've stepped back as the daughter when I've taken on the role of the biographer. So for me, there were two people when I was writing about them. There were two people who were not linked with me. And I had to, in fact, a lot of people were a bit shocked at the brutality of the text, because they didn't expect a daughter to be so strident in her descriptions or in the narrative concerning her parents. So I think my greatest challenge was to be able to write about my parents without that emotional bond. And I do admit that I got a lot of flack from it, from within the family and other conservative people who I knew, saying that, why did you have to write all of it? Just like Laxmi said, because the people are not ready to accept that somebody can be so candid about her own parents. And my parents' life was it's like a bizarre fairy tale. And in fact, I always quote this when I talk about this, is in one of the reviews at, I think it was the Indian Express, where the reviewer started her piece by saying that if this was fiction, it's too bizarre to be believable.
So your next book, Merchants of Death, which is a novel on arms dealers and is reflective of some of the concerns of current politics, has that escaped the attention of powers that be?
Well, so far I've been lucky, but I'll tell you the reason why I wrote Merchants. When I was researching for my father's life, I had a lot of material on the Marwaris. And there was this other story kind of curling up inside me, which I had to write about. So I did fictionalize some of it, and I've woven it into a story which depicts the underbelly of Marwari society.
Wow. So it is, I mean, it's not just the arms dealing and like a newspaper scam revelation, but a sociological treatise as well.
It spans over 4 generations. It's quite a saga of the history of India, right, 50 onwards. We grew up in that generation, so I think I have been able to pretty much portray the Marwaris as a race, which has not really been done before. Nobody has exposed that underbelly of the Marwaris, and I'm quite proud to have done it.
Well, you have an insider's view of it. Now, if I were to sort of try and encapsulate the 3 books that we are going to be talking about, I'd say that Laxmi and Neelima's books are strong and in your face and a little, you get a little taken aback. But when it comes to fame, Nelofar, I feel that you've written the book just as you were brought up, with a little simta hua, thoda cover karke. You wrote it in a restrained manner. You portrayed your mother in this beautiful frame, and she's a beautiful lady. You've put in lovely pictures. She's made a whole generation of beautiful women. She didn't keep the beauty secrets to herself, so she is somebody quite unique. But was that a conscious decision, or is this that you can write no other way but the way you are?
Well, I think both the ladies here had the advantage of writing with time and space between them, which is very different from writing when you are actually living the story yourself too. Time gives you a completely different perspective, a more objective perspective, when you go away from something which is which it gives you a different perspective. So I think my book has been written at a time when I'm living the story myself along with my mother. So so much for that. And I definitely feel that my book is not an objective book. I wouldn't ever try to pretend that it's an objective book, because it's definitely been touched by the affection of a daughter. I think there will be many, many books written on my mother's life, because she's a very famous woman and an iconic lady who's done a lot for the country and for the beauty business at large and for women's empowerment. But I don't think any of those books will have the quality that my book has, of memories that sometimes my mother has trouble even remembering, because from a child's mind you do something seem very startling when you're small and you remember them. So I think it's an invaluable piece of document on her life, and I hope it is an invaluable piece of document on colleges that are at some point studying, the secret of her success. However, the other books that are going to be written about her, the many, many books, will always be unobjective, written by strangers who can look at her in a different way. But as I am living the story right now with my mother, which is still evolving, it's definitely not an objective book. Yes.
So actually that's what I wanted to ask you. Was there any particular reason why you decided to write the book now? And I ask this question because maybe later would have given you some space. And secondly, I think the business is flourishing and you're heading it. Where do you get the time to do all this?
Well, my mother's heading it, but we're all, working with her as a family. If you love something, you get the time for it. I've always loved writing. And your first question was why now and why not much later? It's just that, quite honestly, I was sitting at Barista having a cup of coffee. My mother has shopping in every little situation. So she got up at Barista and started this little bookshop, and she'd gone to kind of clean it up and get some books. So she came back with this book written on Gulzar's life by his daughter Boski, and she said, "This is a gift for you." And when I opened it, the first page said, "Promise me you will write a book on me one day, Nelofar." And that's why my book ends with these lines, that it's a promise kept to you, dear mum. So, it is, that's how I really wrote. But yes, my publishers have already asked me, it's been 2 years, they've already asked me to, upgrade it, bring it up to time, and so that will be happening. It's an evolving story.
Yeah, I think that story about how your mom sort of takes the promise from you is a lovely story. Equally wonderful is the way you sort of honor that promise, and but given the fact that the reference to that lecture that you gave, which has become course study for an MBA program. Don't you think that between your mother and you can write a whole textbook on business practices and best practices?
Personally, as far as business studies goes, I did not realize that I have a very diverse, portfolio of writing, if you would say. I've written a lot of poetry, I've written humor, I've written different kinds of things. But I didn't know that I had it in me to write on business. And this was particularly interesting because it was on family businesses, the paper, and when it was chosen for the MBA course, I was quite taken aback. So I would love to do a business book. That would be amazing.
It might just put the very affectionate mother-daughter relationship on a different platform.
Absolutely.
By the way, what was your mother's reaction to Flame?
She was completely overcome by emotion. We had a lot of trouble in my mother doing interviews on it initially, because I think for the first time in her life, she saw her life clearly, like you're looking at it. through a telescope or something, because it's very realistically done and it's very up close and personal. So she was very emotional about it, yes, definitely.
You know, you've picked up the word that I would use to describe your mother. She's sensitive, she's, emotional about things. And in that story, in Flame, which I have read, in fact, I read it the day you launched it in Delhi, you remember, I think. I noticed that you had written about all the tragedies the family has gone through, very honestly, including what I consider a very strong thing, the loss of your brother and sudden death and things like that. Were you able to speak to your mother, or did you sort of guess some of her emotions? Or how did you research a person who's living right next to you?
You know, as far as my brother's death is concerned, it actually delayed the book for me by a year. Um, it wasn't just my mother's loss, it was my loss equally, because he was like a son, because he came after 16 years. So much of the time that my mother had to travel for her work, I took care of Samir. So, well, yes, it was extremely difficult writing about it, but I think I've tried to write it as gently as possible. There have been tragedies, and I don't think you want to burden your reader beyond a point with tragedies. So I've tried to write it as gently as possible.
What came out in that segment was your strength, actually. It was quite amazing how you just handled everything at that time. And maybe when your mum read it after a while, did she sort of see, okay, here's the person who can carry forward my work?
Well, I hope she did see that. I hope she did see that. I think it was just a time when we were all very stoic. Yes, I've held the family together. I would definitely say that. And I've written in my book that I met the Sufi performer, and I don't know what to name her because she's so spiritual, Zila Khan, one day, and she said, I've hardly seen you, but I know in every family there is a pillar that holds it together, and you're that pillar. And it's a little embarrassing for me to say it because I'm a humble person. I like to think I am. But yes, I think for every family, for every person who becomes successful, there are various people who play a part. When there's a play going on stage, there are lots of backstage artists, everything. So there's a whole host of energies that come into play. I definitely think that I have had this role in the book. As you can see, I'm as much a character in the book.
Yes.
And I'm glad that you, Arshia, you had the sensitivity to note that I have been the person who has held together the situation, the family, and taken it forward in any crisis.
Was the decision to, give away all the proceeds of from the sale of this book to the Flame Foundation, which is a feminist organization, as much as it's dedicated to economic empowerment and skill development of women, a decision that you took, your mum took?
No, that was a very personal decision. The decision goes back to more like a reaction than anything else. When my publishers gave me my advance, I wouldn't put it into the bank, and then they wanted to give me my royalty. I said I cannot take money for a book on my mother's life. So the only way, and they had to clear their accounts. So I have been, for the longest time, I've been working with His Holiness the Dalai Lama's sister and a whole lot of charities. I have a charity which I've been running where we are turning out about 40, 50 girls every few months with trainings. So I thought it would be a good way to, use the money.